So with the pandemic, all concerts shut down for 2 years. The first concert I saw once things opened up again, I'm in Ottawa. I went to Montreal for Dream Theater, which is a band. You mixed an album back in 1999. So Metropolis Part 2, Scenes from a Memory. That's considered one of their best. It shows up on greatest guitar albums of all time. So you mixed the album, and in the end, they went with 4 of your mixes, and later on, they release an alternative mix album that had all your mixes, I believe. What was it like mixing that music? And with all the again, we're talking about all-time great musicians between Tool and Dream Theater. How do you find the right place in the mix for such complex instruments and parts?
Yeah, it's hard. They're all in that band. It's all very busy playing. So it's finding a way to, panning is obviously one, tonal control is another. You have to carve out tonal differences between the sounds so that they can each speak when their moment is, and balance. You have a moment where something is more important, the other things take a back seat. You have to ride that constantly in a mix. Like, that's more important, this is more important, this is taking the feature, this tone is too big, now we have to thin that out for this sound to come through, that sort of thing. So they were great to work with. John, was Petrucci was kind of taking the lead at that time in the band. They were, I had a little mini battle with Mayung, because there was a section of the song he wanted chorus on the bass, and I was never a big fan of chorus on the bass. I relented at one point, but they went with Kevin's mix. I think this was a time period when everybody was, doing a lot of compression, a lot of limiting, making things very loud. I wasn't sort of so much into that. I wanted to breathe more, a little bit more dynamic. They wanted a more kind of upfront, harder hitting thing for Kevin's, and it's a great mix too. It's just a different take on the music. So I knew that they had released one with all of my mixes. I don't know what the sort of balance of opinion is on that, but.
So how is it decided if you're going to produce a project, engineer a project, mix a project? How is that decided? Some bands you do everything, some, I guess maybe they've already produced with someone else and then they just want your great mix. How is that decided?
It's usually what the people want. I mean, I don't generally engineer just engineer things anymore. Either I'll get hired as a producer or a mixer. So if they want, if they want, sometimes I'll just get hired as an executive producer to sort of listen to the demos or listen to the things and add sort of musical suggestions, or sit in on rehearsal, help develop things, and then somebody else will take over. It's all dependent upon what the client wants. So if they want me to produce, then I can produce. If they want me to mix, I can mix. If they want me to do both, I can do both. If they want me to do just executive production, I can do that too. So it's just a matter of what the client wants, and when they seek you out, they have an idea for what they think your role will be, and they'll ask.
Is there a preference at all between the two? Like, in a perfect world, if you're going to work with a band, would you hope to produce and mix, or do you enjoy one versus the other, or are they just all skills that you offer that people are looking for?
I like variety, so I enjoy doing all of those jobs. And I like the fact that I do different versions of them. If I were just to be doing one thing all the time, I think I would get bored. Like, if I was just doing mixing for everybody all the time, as nice as it is, because I just come in, this is also my home, my studio, so I'm able to stay at home, do the mixing, go do something else. That's great. But I do like to get my hands dirty and dive into the trenches with a band with a full production. So, it's again, that often requires traveling or doing lots of things. So I like to have a balance of those two things.
So we have another quote sent in here. This is Glenn Milcham, the drummer from Blue Rodeo. So this is what he has to say. I've only worked with Dave on one project, which was with Ensign. Am I saying that right? Ensign Broderick, aka Jason Ensign.
Broderick.
Ensign Broderick, aka Jason Snyderman. He was super pleasant and chill, and easily one of the most fastidious producers I've worked with. I was particularly impressed with how he had each song mapped out bar by bar with notes on particular things he wanted to hear from each instrument. He was very efficient, yet patient and respectful to the musician, with no ego in spite of his impressive CV. A real gent and a consummate pro. Glenn Milcham, Blue Rodeo.
That's very nice of him to say. I just saw Blue Rodeo the other night. Went to go see them play in Hamilton, actually. Yeah. Oh, Glenn was great to work with. He mentioned it's like charting. I've sort of developed over the years that I learned. I started from Dan Lanois. He would have books and he would, take notes. And so I developed, sort of stole that technique of I always have notebooks. I've got a million of them laying around. And when I get the demos for a band, I will chart out the song, but I don't chart it out on musical notation paper. I can read, but only like remedial note reading. So I do essentially just little boxes, and the boxes have different shapes depending upon the time signature of the thing. And I've developed it over the last sort of 35 years to where now I can map out the whole song. I can take notes on the side, write chordal, progressions inside the boxes. It's just a way that I've developed that I can communicate music to me. So I can listen, I can look at the page, I know where I am, and I know what I want to have done at that point. So I can write notes. I can also use it to assess performances. So as I'm going down instrumentally, it's like the guitar is doing this. Okay, well, I've got some notes coming down. I'll know when the whole thing's finished because my memory's not so great, never really was. So I like to know from a visual standpoint, yeah, we've recorded this guitar part and it's all done. We're all there. If I don't, sometimes I've gone back early in my career, I would go back in a project and go, oh, we never recorded the second chorus with that guitar. What are we doing? This is the days before flying stuff around was so easy, right? So it's like you'd have to call them back in to play it again. This way, you know from a visual standpoint what jobs are done and what are not.
In 2001, you worked with Muse on Origin of Symmetry. You recorded 4 songs, 3 of which ended up being singles. And then there was an overlap in schedule between the Tool album and the Muse album. Is that correct?
Well, I mean, there was a little bit, but it was as much as anything that they were on tour. Oh. So they came in a time frame where they were in the midst of a tour. So we went to a studio, recorded those songs, and then they went back out on tour again. So
okay,
there was 2 conflicts.
Got it. So there's a question sent in here from Serge Menard. He asks, given this was so early in Muse's career, what was your greatest challenge making a 3-piece sound so good? It seems normal at this point of their career, but that album, although not their first, really set that standard for great sounding 3-piece.
I worked with sort of smaller bands before. I think it's just a matter of the musical ideas that Matt Bellamy would have, and the sort of fullness of the tone of both the drums and Chris on the bass, the way that they filled out that area, that you can get a big sound from a 3-piece, as long as, I mean, they're not dissimilar to the way Rush works, right? They're able to fill out sounds with different, bigger parts or more added things that they can play live, because they don't usually play to track too much. Like Rush never plays, very rarely plays to any track, maybe the odd Subdivision's vocal or something like that. But other than that, they're able to create this because they have great musical ideas that cover all the spaces, and you don't feel unsatisfied. So yeah, we worked very hard to develop interesting parts and interesting approaches to things, so that it didn't feel like an empty sound.
So Muse is known as such an amazing live band. I've heard that you had the band record together to capture that live sound energy. Is that true? And how do you keep the sounds separated when recording, if everyone's recording together? Are they in separate
isolation
rooms?
Booths?
Isolation
booths. And nowadays it's a lot easier, because you can really utilize for recording purposes, you can record DI for a lot of, and then reamp things, so you can get a lot of isolation. It's great when bands can play together. I only do it though with bands that are really great at playing together. Otherwise, younger bands are often really not as experienced. They're not as good at working together in a studio being a more an intimidating environment for young bands. So that this way, I will say, okay, well, let's go in and let's focus on each instrument so we get it all right and you're comfortable with what you're hearing. Whereas, if you're a younger band and you're trying to play through a song and somebody messes up in the middle, it can become a frustration. Whereas more experienced and more skilled musicians, you can play them together and they can get that band feel.
So this album was a big hit in the UK. I because of the label, I don't think it was released in the US until several years later, and then became, it's done well since then. Could you have predicted while recording this album that band Muse would go on to become one of the biggest bands in the world for the last 20 plus years?
Yeah, actually I could. And the reason is this: I saw them play in London before we worked together. I went to go see them play at this little club called the Monarch. Now, it was a small venue, smaller than, like, we're talking back room of the Rivoli kind of. Do you know that place in Toronto? Small venue, nothing of any size. And they were playing that show like they were playing Wembley Stadium. They were playing not to the back row, they were playing to 3 streets over. Right. And I asked Matt about that afterwards. I said, wow, you guys are really, you put on this big show. He's like, I'm aiming for this big show. It's like, if I don't play it now, I'll never be able to play it. So I'm going for this. And he was driven as a musician and as an artist. So I knew that either it was going to be huge or die catastrophically, one of the two. So I could have predicted that.
So back then, Muse was signed to Maverick Records, which is Madonna's label. And this is rumor. Rumor has it that when you guys completed the album, that they weren't happy with how much falsetto that Matt was singing, and they wanted him to go back and somehow change the melodies so he wasn't singing so high. The band refused. They got dropped. That's why it's only out in the UK. They signed with a new label. Is that true, or is that just rumor?
I can't speak to that. I wasn't involved in those conversations, so I don't know.
That is fair.
I mean, I think the problem was that at the time they were being compared quite heavily to Radiohead, which I mean, I don't think is really fair because they're really not the same kind of band. But anybody who would sing up in that register would immediately get compared to Tom York because he sings up in that register. It's like anybody who sings with a high voice in rock gets compared to Geddy, and it's like Coheed and Cambria, right? Which the bands are really nothing alike, or very little alike, other than they both have guitars and high voices, but that's it. So I don't know. I find it. People are lazy often when they come to these comparisons, and they don't listen to the nuts and bolts of the music. They just hear a high falsetto voice and go, "Oh, well, it's just like Tom York and Radiohead." And maybe that was the concern, that would be too much of a competition. I don't know. Anyway, I think Muse, of anybody, have carved out their own unique identity within music. So I think whoever thought that might have been a drawback were wrong.
Yeah, they've gone on to sell 30 million records. I think the record label made a mistake there, possibly. Some musicians have this aura around them of genius. Someone like a Trent Reznor from Nine Inch Nails, Maynard from Tool, maybe Dave Grohl from Nirvana, Foo Fighters. I kind of get that feeling with Matt Bellamy. Is that an accurate statement, that he just oozes this musical genius, different instruments, the live performance, such grandiose vision of what's possible?
Yeah, I agree. I think a big part of my role during the recording was to make sure that Matt would complete one idea before he went on to the 4 others that he had within the process of overdubbing one part. So, it was really to keep him, it was really as much as anything to keep him focused, to finish the job in one. It's like we would be in the middle of a guitar overdub and he'd be like, "Oh, I want to do this thing on the world, sir. Hang on." So it would be plugged in. Yeah, okay, we'll play that. And I'm like, okay, get that idea down. Now let's go back. Let's finish this guitar. And then we'll go over there. And then in the middle of that, he'd be like, "Oh, but I want to do this." Yeah, I think that he has, as much claim to musical genius as any of the greats that I've worked with.
Sounds like he's just oozing with ideas and creativity.
Yeah, for sure.
So in 2002, you work with Mudvayne, the album "The End of All Things to Come." It seems like you're just working with bands that have absolute world-class musicianship. Is that something that stood out to you about Mudvayne? Is that each of those musicians are just incredible musicians
for
on their
sure,
instruments?
for sure, really great. I mean, Greg, obviously great riff player, but it's funny how he kind of ends up being almost like the sort of the rhythm bass player in that band, and Ryan ends up being the melody player because he's such an incredible virtuoso on bass. Again, a group of super talented musicians and a great singer. Same sort of thing. It was just a different flavor because Mudvayne so much had their character by the fluidity of the bass sound.
When I was 17, I did a road trip with my parents from Ottawa to Toronto for Canadian Music Week, and I saw Mudvayne. I was 17, and this unknown trio band, they looked like teenagers, opened, and it was 3 Days Grace. So nobody knew them at the time. A few months later, maybe, I don't know, a year later, I Hate Everything About You blows up on radio. They've been one of the biggest bands since then. So I got to see this double bill with 3 Days Grace and Mudvayne. And nice. Man, Mudvayne, I remember the lights came on, just blinding white lights, and everyone kind of has to turn away. And then the lights go off, and when you look, the members are all on stage in their place, and then they just dropped into the songs, and it was like breathtaking.
Yeah, very exciting live for sure. They put on a great show. It's quite an assault what they do, but in the best
assault on
way.
the senses. Yeah. I always wanted to ask you because you've worked with these bands that are so complex and so intricate and such amazing musicians. Is it ever intimidating going into a project where you know a band's going to do this insanely epic album with crazy epic songs with very very intense parts, crazy time signatures? Is it ever intimidating before starting a project, thinking like, how am I going to capture all of this into one package? And do you ever just think, man, I want to go record a straight up pop artist that's going to do 3-minute songs, 4 chords? Do you ever think that, or is that just me?
I think I attract to myself the kind of band that has intricate parts and intricate compositions. So it's not really intimidating to me anymore. At the beginning, which would have been really the King Crimson or something like that, but I mean, I kind of grew up doing music like that already. So it's not really been anything I ever overthought. It was just like, okay, well, here's a song and it's this length, and let's see what the best way is to record it. And let's record it and get it down and mix it in the way that all the important parts, you can hear them very well. So it would be fun to do something different in the sense of simplicity. But I would probably want to fill it up with a few things because that's sort of what I'm used to. But yeah, having something simple and non-complex would be fun to do.
Someday.
So
I have another.
I just don't get those calls, Joel.
Nobody calls. I feel like it's self-inflicted pain with all these super difficult projects. Yeah. You're a glutton for pain in the musical realm.
Well, people look at your history and say, well, he does that. So, okay, let's call him.
I have another comment sent in here. This is from a Juno Award-winning engineer mixer that's worked with Olivia Rodrigo, Jason Mraz, Snoop Dogg. So this is from Vic Florencia.
Oh, yeah, Vic.
So he says, David, we all know him as an awesome engineer, producer, mixer. Besides having great ears, he has a wonderful heart. He's always eager to share his wealth of knowledge and offer advice. I'm honored to call him a friend. He's so good, it's ridiculous. Now back to us figuring out the whole Atmos thing, LOL. Was that Dolby Atmos? Is
that's it? Yeah. So Vic and Ryan and I, we've been spending a bunch of time trying to work out the Atmos mixing, and I did an Atmos mix for the Mastodon record that I just did. And so we're all fairly new at it. It's pretty exciting. it's kind of like the Wild West, where there's lots of different standards and nobody's really figured out exactly how it's supposed to go. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to mix in Atmos. You get a lot more dimension to work with. So and yeah, I mean, Vic's he's becoming a master at it. So I was up at his studio the other day and he was playing me some stuff and it just blows me away. He was so good. So yeah, he's way ahead of me on that for sure. I'm trying to catch up. I'm one of the old guys now, trying to catch up to the young bucks.
Is that what we're hearing with spatial audio? Is that the same thing or no?
Spatial audio, I think, is a different format. I think that's more of a Sony format. Atmos is Dolby. So I believe, I could be wrong, don't quote me on that, but I think spatial audio is more of a Sony thing, kind of like VHS Betamax kind of thing.
And this is different.
Atmos was developed by.
Okay, and this
Atmos
is different than surround
Dolby,
sound.
so.
This is a different thing.
It is surround sound. No, it's
Okay.
surround sound. It's immersive audio. So it is. There are speakers everywhere, but it translates as well to binaural in just stereo headphones. Apple iPods do the proper one that even is sort of location based. So when you turn your head, the music stays there, kind of thing, which is a little bit weird for me. But they do the binaural, so it translates to binaural 5171. And then full Atmos. The system kind of, in a magical way that I only so much understand, seems to know what your playback situation is and adapts itself to fit that playback situation.